I always like to start with a little game I call George Washington Fact or Fiction. So I'm going to throw out a couple statements. You say fact or fiction. I cannot tell a lie. Yes, I did chop down that cherry tree. Fact or fiction?
Fiction.
Fiction. Yeah, a little fable myth started by a preacher named Parson Weems to try to tell us a little something about George Washington as a young man. He throws a silver dollar across the Potomac River. Fact or fiction?
Fiction.
Fiction. He is said to have skipped a rock across the Rappahannock and thrown a stone over the natural bridge out in Rockbridge County. His first job was as a surveyor. Fact or fiction? Fact. A job that will serve him well in a number of capacities, not only as a military officer, but as he looks to purchase land. He's the commanding general of the Revolutionary War Continental Army. Fact or fiction?
Fact.
Fact. President of the Constitutional Convention and unanimously elected twice as president. Fact or fiction? Fact. He dies, they renamed the federal city after him, erected a 555-foot obelisk in his honor. Fact or fiction? Fact. Yet for all these things that we understand about Washington, if he rode up right now and we said, General Washington, could you describe yourself in one word? You know what word he'd choose?
Farmer.
Farmer. Y'all have been paying attention. That is his love. That is his passion. And that is also the basis for becoming very successful here in Virginia. He inherits a 2,100-acre tobacco plantation, starts looking very carefully at the business of farming, doesn't really like what he sees. Generations of Washingtons had grown tobacco as their cash crop, had done quite well. But with the very oppressive regulations put on the tobacco trade by the British government, Washington is starting to go into debt. Here's the deal on tobacco. You grow it, you harvest it, you pack it, you put it on a British registry ship. There's a British sea captain at the helm. There's a British crew on that ship. There's a British issued insurance policy covering your crop as it sails from here into a British port. Do we see a common denominator? British. They are sold at auction. The proceeds are returned not as cash, but as credit towards trade goods. Well, easy way to look at trade goods is stuff. It's furniture, it's fabric, it's dishes, it's all the nice things the Washingtons want to have up in the house. Washington's calculated about 80% of his hard work is going into somebody else's pocket. Oh, and it gets worse. With a lot of increased competition from other tobacco growing colonies, with increased supply, what normally happens to the price of any good? Washington ships his tobacco to England, his trade goods come back, and there's a bill attached. The bill says, no big deal, you don't have to pay us now. We'll take payment for the goods you just received at a next year's harvest. Does anybody see any advantage to that? Think debt. Think compounding debt. That plant isn't even in the ground yet, and it's paying off what he already has. Washington's got to make a decision. He's got to make a change pretty quickly because he does not see debt as a viable business model. He starts looking at other things to grow here at Mount Vernon and decides that, hey, I can grow wheat. The problem he has is he now has to get very aggressive in renourishing the soil. Generations of tobacco farming have depleted the nutrients from the soil, which is why he's probably getting less yield year over year and a lesser quality product. We're coming up into the age of enlightenment. We're starting to see a lot of people write about agricultural science. Washington is reading everything he can get his hands on. One of the first books Washington reads is by a British farmer named Jethro Tull. You all heard of Jethro Tull, haven't you? Proud, you know, aqualung, thick as a brick. Tull puts forth that dirt is actually alive. It's got little mouths in it. So what you want to do is break apart the soil to expose more mouths so it can eat the seed and grow the plant. Sounds a little iffy in the science part, but it shows that Washington is willing to read this, look at this, and decide what's going to make sense. With a single crop as the basis of his income, Washington starts to look and think, you know, they're doing something really interesting in England. They're doing crop rotation. Washington starts looking at it and says, hey, I can do that here. He breaks his fields out into 7. As Mount Vernon grows, and by 1785, it has gone from 2,100 acres to 8,000 acres, with 3,200 acres under cultivation. Now, for the non-farmers in the group, everyone here who has ever seen a football field, raise their hand. That's about an acre. So imagine having 3,200 football fields under crop. And John Deere tractors, combines, all of it being worked by hand in farm animals. In his crop rotation, and as Mount Vernon again begins to expand, he breaks it out into 5 farms. Mansion House Farm, with a beautiful home and the ornamental gardens and the orchards, really becomes a farm in name only. The heavy lifting takes place on 4 surrounding farms. There's River Farm, there's Muddy Hole, there's Dogue Run, and Union Farm. Each of these farms, and we'll move over to the map here, those fields are broken into 7. In those 7 fields, you'll have 2 crops in wheat, 2 in green manure. Well, green manure is what we think of today as nitrogen fixers. Things like buckwheat and cowpeas and turnips that you can grow several times during the growing season and plow back into the soil, thereby getting nutrients back in. He'll have corn in one of the fields, largest staple crop here at Mount Vernon. A lot of mouths to feed, and that corn becomes important a little bit later. He's got rye, oats, barley in another field. Again, very important when Washington decides to start making whiskey. And lastly, pasture grass field. Washington has anywhere from 600 to 1,000 head of sheep that he will put in these large fields with perimeter fencing like you see here, but inside those fields, smaller fencing where Washington will systematically move the sheep through these pasture fields. They'll eat up the pasture grass, and what do they leave behind? Fertilizer. Sheep manure, which doesn't need to be composted. So they're doing really double duty. Not only are they clearing the field and pulling those plants up by the roots, but then they're leaving fertilizer behind that then the following year you're able to come in and start planting. Before we leave this area, everybody turn and look that way. Who can identify this body of water? Potomac River. The Potomac River in some ways is the interstate for Washington. This is infrastructure. In another way, it is a major source of income for the state. Upwards of 2 million fish, shad and herring, will be pulled from the Potomac River when they begin to run in April. And over the next 4 to 6 weeks, everybody at Mount Vernon, save the cook and housekeeper, will be at 3 fisheries on the Potomac processing fish. Those fish will be netted, they'll be cleaned, dressed, and salt packed. Those salt packed fish, some kept here for rations for the slaves, The rest are put on a ship and bound for the sugar islands, the sugarcane plantations in the West Indies down in the Caribbean. As we start moving over, we'll stop at the map here. This is a map that Washington draws in 1793. Not only does it show the scope of Mount Vernon and his land holdings, it's also a sales brochure. Washington by now is really starting to look at retirement. Most Washingtons don't make it past 40. Washington's like going, hey, you know, I've kind of beat the Washington lineage odds here. I'm going to try to sell off some of this. He really just wants to sit up on that piazza, kick his feet up, and look out over the Potomac, and as he says, enjoy his big and vine. In the different farms, again, the 7 fields. Now, according to the map, in the "you are here" part, if you look at it really closely, it makes it look like we're all standing in the Potomac River. In Washington's lifetime, we would be standing in irrecoverable swampland. He referred to this as his hellhole, because we really felt it important to demonstrate Washington's commitment to farming and some of the innovations he puts into play. We backfilled this area, and we have reproduced in miniature Washington's approach to farming in the 18th century. Another part about what Washington is doing. Very early on, things he does here at Mount Vernon is to increase the success of the farm, to get higher yields. Washington begins to sort of change his approach from a Mount Vernon focus to a United States focus. He begins to take really a paternalistic approach to farming here in America. 90% of us are farmers. And here's the big problem. Most of the farmers have a 250, 300 acre farm. Anybody here ever work with someone who said, well, this is the way we've always done it? Let's take it to the next step. You know, the classic definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. The farmers, for fear of trying something new, if they fail, they starve. They might lose their farm. So they continue along the same path. Well, Washington says, you know, this isn't going to work. This is not smart. So what do? He's going to break out acres of his farm, and he will do studies on 60 different crops here at Mount Vernon. He's getting seeds and cuttings from as far away as China. He, along with some of his forward-thinking contemporaries, believe it's incumbent upon those of means to advance agricultural science for those that can't take the risk. He wants to create a path where no other path could be mistaken. What he'll do is he'll do density studies and fertilization studies and strain studies within the same species. He will try them in the sun, in the shade, with the goal being to understand what will grow best here, what will be the most successful farming technique that he can then put out to the rest of the nation. In 1794, General Washington, in his address to Congress, suggests as a nation we need a clearinghouse for agricultural science. Today, we call that the Department of Agriculture. But Washington's vision for this organization, I guess, they've heard it all before. I'm surprised they're not running the other way. Yeah, it's, they have a condition response sort of thing. They see a vehicle, they think food. Washington's vision for the Department of Agriculture doesn't come to fruition until 1862, when Abraham Lincoln signs the Organic Act. So when we here at Mount Vernon talk about Washington, the pioneer farmer, the visionary farmer, we think we've got pretty good basis. Before we leave this area and start heading into the pioneer farm, do you guys have any questions?